My 70th birthday was approaching at the speed of a freight train, and there was nothing I could do about it. Another date on the calendar, another notch on the tree of life, which seemed to be beginning to lose its leaves. I, Walter Thorndike, 67 years old, met this day like so many others, waking up in my old house on the outskirts of Atherton and drinking strong black coffee. At my age, holidays are no longer something special. Rather, they are reminders of what is no longer there, or who. My Eleanor passed away 5 years ago. Cancer left us no chance of a long old age together as we had dreamed. Every birthday since then has only increased the feeling of loneliness. I continued to use her cup with the chipped edge, as if that could keep a piece of Ellie in this house. 42 years at the electronic systems plant had made my hands rough and my temper not very malleable. I worked my way up from assemblyman to foreman. I worked honestly, didn't throw money around, save for a rainy day. My father always said, "A penny spares a ruble," and I followed this rule all my life, perhaps too strictly. At least that's what my son Edmund thought. Old-fashioned stinginess, he called my frugality. In his eyes, I was a hopelessly backward old man who didn't understand how the modern world works. Every time I refused to lend him a few thousand for another whim, his face contorted with poorly concealed irritation. Lately, our meetings had become less and less frequent, especially since he'd married Prudence Atwood 3 years ago, a woman who'd made it clear to me that she was an annoying necessity. Slender, always impeccably dressed, with a cold smile and a calculating gaze. She was the complete opposite of my warm, cozy Eleanor. Prue, as Edmund called her, worked in real estate, and by the looks of it, was used to a life far more luxurious than my son could provide with his engineer's salary. I sipped my coffee and looked at the envelope on the table. The letter from the law firm of Blackmore and Associates had arrived 3 days ago. I opened it, read it, but set it aside without giving it much thought. It said to report to discuss my brother Hubert's estate. We had not spoken to him for 15 years. Our last conversation had been a quarrel over a piece of land my parents had inherited. Hubert wanted to sell. I insisted on keeping it. In the end, the lot stayed, but my brother moved to Oregon, cutting all ties. I heard he bought a piece of land there and lived as a hermit. I got the news of his death 2 weeks ago through a mutual acquaintance. I didn't go to the funeral. Too much water had passed, and my health wasn't up to it. What would our last conversation have been like if I had known it would be the last? That question would now forever remain unanswered. The letter spoke of some sort of inheritance, but I doubted it was anything substantial. Hubert had never been a wealthy man, quite the opposite. It was probably a formality, some old photographs or personal belongings that he had somehow decided to leave to me rather than to his children. A phone call snapped me out of my musings. Edmund's name popped up on the screen. "Dad, do you remember that we're expecting you tomorrow?" He began without greeting. "Hello, son." "Yes, of course I remember," I replied, suppressing a sigh. "Prue's going to make your favorite pecan pie," he said with a fake cheerfulness in his voice. I doubted Prue knew about my culinary preferences. In 3 years, she'd never once asked what I liked. Besides, I was allergic to nuts, something Eleanor always remembered. "Very nice of her," I said neutrally. "What time should I get there?" 5 o'clock. "And Dad, we want to talk to you about something important." Edmund's voice became serious. "Has something happened?" No, nothing's wrong. It's just something we need to talk about." "Well, I've got a meeting to run to. See you tomorrow." He disconnected before I could respond. A topic for discussion. I knew all too well what that meant. Money. The last 3 times my son and I had had a topic of discussion, it had been about a loan for a new car, a home renovation, or an investment in some dubious project. And each time I said no, explaining that my savings were a safety cushion in case of illness or other unforeseen circumstances. And each time Edmund looked at me as if I were denying him his legal right to the money. I picked up the envelope with the letter and ran my eyes over the dry lines again. Maybe I should go after all. It was unlikely to be anything important, but at least it would be an excuse to take my mind off tomorrow in the inevitable conversation with my son and daughter-in-law. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted my musings. I wasn't expecting visitors, so I went to open the door with some bewilderment. On the threshold stood Thelma, my niece, the daughter of Eleanor's sister, a tall, sturdy woman of 42 with a short haircut and kind eyes. The only person, besides Eleanor, who has always accepted me for who I am. Dash, Uncle Walt. Dash, she wrapped her arms around me. I thought I'd stop by on my way home from work. It's your birthday tomorrow, and I'm not sure I can make it. Thelma worked as a school bus driver in a neighboring town, and her schedule changed frequently. She brought the smell of fresh breeze and some elusive joy into the house. You're right on time as always, I smiled. I was just about to make myself a sandwich. Would you like to join me? Thelma walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator in her masterly way, and shook her head. Uncle Walt, it's like the Gobi Desert in here. Let me run to the store and make something normal. I didn't mind. Thelma was always easy. She didn't judge me for being old-fashioned stingy, didn't ask for money, and seemed to genuinely enjoy our conversations. While she was in the kitchen, I told her about Edmund's call and the conversation to come. Would they ask for money again? Thelma frowned as she chopped vegetables for the salad. Probably, I shrugged. What else do they want from me? I don't understand your son, Uncle Walt. Thelma shook her head. He's got a great job, and his wife makes good money too. What are they all missing? People always lack something, I said philosophically, especially if they're used to living beyond their means. And this Prue... Thelma paused, choosing her words. I don't want to say anything bad, but she reminds me of a bird of prey, always looking for something to snatch. I chuckled. Thelma had always been straightforward. She got that quality from her mother. What about the letter? She asked, noticing the envelope on the table. Was it important? I told her about the letter from the law firm and Hubert's death. So you didn't go to the funeral? There was no judgment in her voice, only concern. No, we hadn't spoken in 15 years. What would I have done? Play the grieving brother? Maybe I should have gone, if only to say goodbye. I shook my head. Too late to think about that now. Besides, my arthritis was acting up, so I didn't have time to travel. Thelma put a plate of appetizing salad in front of me and sat down across from me. Are you going to go to that law firm? I think so. I don't think there's anything interesting there, though. Hubert lived modestly as far as I know. It's still worth going, Thelma smiled. I can drive you if you want. I have a window between flights tomorrow morning. I looked at her gratefully. What would I do without this woman? Thank you, but I can manage. It's not far. I'll walk, stretch my legs. We talked some more, about her work, about her sister's children, about the weather, which lately had been surprisingly good for late fall. When Thelma was about to leave, she handed me a small package. Happy birthday, Uncle Walt. I know it's early, but it might not be possible to stop by tomorrow. It was a warm, hand-knitted scarf, just like the one I'd wanted to buy for winter, but had put off because of the high price. Thelma, this is... I was so moved, I couldn't find the words. Thank you. You're welcome, she kissed my cheek. You're the only one who reminds me of my mom. Same directness, same honesty. Take care of yourself, okay? After she left, the house fell silent again. I sat down in my favorite chair by the window, the same one Eleanor liked to read in the evenings. Tomorrow I would turn 68. Most of my life is behind me, and what can I say about it? I've worked honestly, loved my wife, raised my son. Not so little when you think about it. But why does it make me sad to think about it? My gaze fell back on the envelope with the letter. Maybe I should go to that law firm before Edmund's holiday dinner. Maybe it would take my mind off the sad thoughts and somehow prepare me for the inevitable conversation about money. It's decided. Tomorrow morning, I'll go to Blackmore and Associates. After all, what have I got to lose? The morning of my birthday began with a phone call. I had just had time to brew my coffee when the old machine trilled. Edmund's name popped up on the screen. Happy birthday, Dad, my son said without much enthusiasm. He sounded tired. How are you feeling? Thank you, Edmund. The usual, I said, holding the receiver against my shoulder and pulling Eleanor's cup out of the cupboard. Nothing special, just another day. Don't say that, he objected with feigned cheerfulness. 68 is a good age. You're still going strong. I didn't say anything. My arthritis and blood pressure wouldn't agree with that statement. Listen, Dad, Edmund continued after a pause. We've had a slight change of plans. Prue's a little busy today, so we're expecting you at 6 o'clock tonight instead of 5. Is that okay? I suppressed a sigh. Typical of them to change plans at the last minute without thinking about my time. Sure, no problem. 6 o'clock is 6 o'clock. Great. I could hear the relief in his voice. Oh, and, we invited a couple friends over. Nothing fancy, just to make it fun. Fun for who? I thought, but I said out loud. Okay, it's your house. It's your call. Don't be like that, Dad, Edmund said, a hint of irritation in his voice. We want to have a party. A birthday should be special. I've never liked noisy gatherings. After Eleanor died, I preferred to celebrate my birthday alone or with Thelma a modest dinner, a nice glass of whiskey, maybe an old movie on TV. But Edmund and Prue insisted on a family celebration. Of course, son, I appreciate your concern. We exchanged a couple more meaningless phrases and I hung up the phone. Looking at my watch, I decided I had enough time to visit the law firm of Blackmore and Associates before the holiday dinner. The day was clear but cool. I put on the new scarf Thelma had given me and headed downtown. The law firm's office was in an old brick building on Maple Street. The sign that read Blackmore and Associates was as austere and unassuming as the house itself. I was greeted in the reception area by a young receptionist with a polite smile. What can I do for you? My name is Walter Thorndyke. I received a letter from your firm regarding the estate of my brother, Hubert Thorndyke. She flipped through some papers on the desk. Yes, Mr. Thorndyke. Mr. Blackmore is expecting you. Please come in. Mr. Blackmore's office was furnished with the same understated elegance as the reception room. The lawyer himself, a man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard, rose from his desk and extended his hand to me. Mr. Thorndyke, nice to meet you. Please have a seat. I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk. Your letter spoke of my brother's inheritance. That's right. Mr. Blackmore put on his glasses and opened the folder in front of him. Your brother, Hubert Thorndyke, made a will about 3 years ago. According to that document, you are the sole heir to his estate. The only one? I couldn't hide my surprise. What about his children? Mr. Hubert Thorndyke had no children. Mr. Blackmore looked at me over his glasses. He never married. This news took me by surprise. I was sure Hubert had a family. Maybe I was confusing him with someone else? 15 years is a long time. And what does that inheritance include? I asked, expecting to hear about some personal items or, at best, a small amount of money. Mr. Blackmore coughed. A tract of land in Oregon of about 20 acres, a house on that tract, Mr. Thorndyke's personal property, and bank accounts totaling, he paused as if checking a figure, about $10 million. I felt the world around me stop for a moment. $10 million? My voice sounded hoarse. There must be some mistake. I assure you, there is no mistake. Mr. Blackmore held out some documents to me. Your brother bought a piece of land many years ago for a relatively small sum of money. Over time, the land has become part of a technology cluster, and the value of the land has increased tenfold. In addition, Mr. Thorndyke has proven to be a very successful investor. I looked at the documents that confirmed what the lawyer said. My brother, whom I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, had left me a fortune I couldn't even dream of. There's something else. Mr. Blackmore pulled a sealed envelope from the folder. Your brother left a personal letter for you? I took the envelope, the name in Hubert's familiar handwriting, and put it in my jacket pocket. I'll read it later, when I'm alone. What do I have to do? I asked, still not fully comprehending what had happened. Today you only need to sign a few documents confirming your identity and your right to the inheritance. The transfer process will take some time, but I will try to speed up the formalities. I mechanically signed the papers, asked some questions, received answers, but it all happened as if in a fog. $10 million, a sum that changed my life completely. Leaving the office of the law firm, I walked the streets of Atherton for a while, trying to comprehend the news that had fallen on me. What am I going to do with this kind of money? How would it change my life? And most importantly, why had Hubert left it all to me and not someone else? I didn't know the answers to these questions. The only thing I knew for sure was that no one could know about this inheritance yet, at least not until I had sorted it out and made a decision. When I got home, I put Hubert's letter in my dresser drawer, thinking I would read it later. Right now, I needed to get my thoughts together before visiting my son. A birthday was not the best time to think seriously about sudden wealth. I showered, put on my best suit, the same one I'd worn at Eleanor's funeral, and looked at myself in the mirror. Just an ordinary older man with a wrinkled face and gray hair. Who would have thought that this man was now a millionaire? At 6:30, I drove my old Ford toward Edmund and Prue's house. They lived in the upscale neighborhood of Atherton, in a house that was clearly beyond their means. A two-story mansion with a manicured garden and a swimming pool all required a lot of money to maintain. No wonder they were always trying to borrow money from me. As I parked in front of the house, I noticed several expensive cars. Apparently, a couple of friends actually meant a whole company. I suppressed my irritation and headed for the front door. Prue opened it. Tall, slender, with perfect hair and makeup, she looked more like a magazine cover model than a homeowner preparing for a family dinner. "Walter," she said with a strained smile, "come on in." Everyone was already gathered. No hug, no kiss on the cheek, not even a happy birthday. Just a simple, "come on in." I crossed the threshold, mentally preparing myself for a few hours of awkward socializing. There was indeed company gathered in the living room, about 10 people, most of whom I was seeing for the first time in my life. Edmund, with a glass of wine in his hand, was talking animatedly with a man in an expensive suit. "Dash, Daddy." He saw me and came rushing toward me. "Happy birthday." He hugged me, quickly, formally, as if doing his duty. He smelled of alcohol, and it looked like the party had started long before I arrived. "Thank you, son." I looked around the living room. "Siano." I wasn't expecting such a large group. "Well, we figured the more people, the merrier." Edmund tugged on my arm. "Come on, I'll introduce you to everyone." The next half hour passed in introductions and idle conversation. Most of the guests were colleagues of either Edmund or Prue, young, successful, ambitious people who clearly had no interest in talking to an older man like me. They would smile politely, shake my hand, and immediately find an excuse to back away. I felt like an extra at this celebration. It was obvious that the whole thing wasn't arranged for me, but to maintain a certain social status for Edmund and Prue. My birthday had become just a convenient excuse for a party. Prue was nowhere to be seen, probably doing the final preparations in the kitchen. I decided to offer my help. At least it would keep me busy. The kitchen in Edmund's house was huge, with marble countertops and modern appliances. Prue stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. Next to her, a young woman in an apron was bustling about, obviously a hired helper. "Do you need help?" I asked, stopping in the doorway. Prue turned around, clearly surprised to see me. "Oh, Walter. No thanks, we'll manage. You'd better go to your guests." Her tone was polite but cold. "If you say so." I was about to leave when I noticed the walnut pie on the table, the same one Edmund had mentioned on the phone. "Prue, I can't eat that pie. I'm allergic to nuts." She froze for a moment, then said quickly, "Of course I remember. It's for the guests. There's another dessert for you." I doubted she really remembered, but decided not to argue. As I was leaving the kitchen, I heard her whisper to her assistant, "He's always in trouble." When I returned to the living room, I found that the company had split into several groups. Edmund was nowhere to be seen. I grabbed a glass of orange juice. Alcohol was contraindicated for me because of my medication, and found a quiet spot in the corner of the room. After a while, Prue appeared and announced that dinner was served. Everyone moved to the dining room where a long table was set. I was seated in a place of honor at the head of the table, next to Edmund. Prue took a seat on the other side. Dinner began with toasts. Edmund made a beautiful speech, but it was insincere, as if it were memorized. He talked about what a wonderful father I'd been, how much I'd taught him, how I'd supported him in all his endeavors. I listened and didn't recognize myself in his words. It was the image of an ideal father from a family movie, not the real me, with my faults, mistakes, and stubbornness. After the toast, the serving of food began. The food was exquisite, but too pretentious for my taste. I preferred simple, hearty food to these small portions with elaborate sauces. The conversation at the table mostly revolved around work, real estate, and travel, topics in which I had little to say. I felt like a ghost at my own party, physically present but invisible to those around me. At one point, I stood up to stretch my legs and back and walked out into the hallway. As I passed Edmund's office, I heard muffled voices. The door was ajar, and I saw my son and Prue standing at the window. "Did you talk to him?" Prue sounded annoyed. "Not yet," Edmund replied. "There hasn't been the right moment." "What other moment do you need?" She lowered her voice, but I could still make out the words. "We're 3 payments away from defaulting on our mortgage. The bank has already sent a warning." I know. Edmund ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he always did when he was nervous. "But I can't just go up to him and say, 'Dad, give us 50,000 or we'll lose the house.'" "Why not?" Prue sounded annoyed. "He's your father. He has the money. He's obligated to help." "He doesn't have to," Edmund said quietly. "And he doesn't have that kind of money. His savings are all he has left for his old age." "Don't be silly," Prue cut him off. "He's worked as a foreman all his life, lives like a hermit, and spends nothing. He must have at least a couple $100,000 set aside. What's he supposed to do with it? Take it to his grave?" I felt the blood rush to my face. Is that what they think of me? That I've been saving all my life just to pay for their wastefulness? "Look," Prue continued, "if we don't find the money soon, we're going to have to sell the house. Is that what you want to do? Move into some cheap apartment in the suburbs?" "Of course not," Edmund's voice sounded tired. "I'll talk to him tonight, after dinner. I promise." "Okay," Prue softened a little. "Just don't be too soft. Remind him of his responsibilities to his family. After all, we gave him this party, invited important people. He should be grateful." I quietly backed away from the door, feeling a wave of anger and resentment rising inside. So that's what this was all about. All this party, all these people, all these smiles and toasts were just a prelude to asking for money. Money that they thought I just didn't want to give out of stinginess. What would they say if they found out about Hubert's inheritance? About the $10 million that now belonged to me? The thought of it gave me mixed feelings, ranging from vengeful satisfaction to deep sadness. Was money really the only thing that mattered to them? I returned to the dining room, where the guests had already begun dessert. Prue and Edmund appeared a few minutes later, both with strained smiles. Looking at them, I couldn't help but think about the conversation I'd just overheard, about the plans to sell the house, about the financial problems they hadn't seen fit to tell me honestly, preferring manipulation and lies. And I felt for the first time that Hubert's inheritance wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to change something in this relationship built on insincerity and self-interest. I just didn't know where that change would come from. After dessert, the guests moved back into the living room. Someone suggested a game of charades, but I refused to participate, citing fatigue. My mood had finally soured after overhearing the conversation between Edmund and Prue. Now every smile, every toast in my honor seemed as fake as cheap costume jewelry. I sat in a chair by the fireplace, watching the fun from the sidelines. Most of the guests had already had a few drinks, and the atmosphere was getting more and more casual. Prue was flitting between groups of people, laughing and pouring wine into glasses. She had drunk as much as the others, and it was evident by her flushed face and slightly sharper movements. Edmund came over to me with a glass of whiskey. "Dad, are you having fun?" he asked, sitting down on the arm of my chair. "Of course I am," I lied. "It's a very nice evening." "Listen," he lowered his voice. "I wanted to talk to you about something important. This is it, the moment I'd been waiting for and dreading all evening." "I'm listening, son." Edmund took a deep breath. "Prue and I are having a little financial difficulty. Nothing serious, just temporary difficulties." "How temporary?" I asked calmly. Well," he hesitated. "The last few months have been difficult. The project I was working on was frozen. Prue's real estate sales haven't been going well either." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "And then, he twirled his glass nervously in his hands. "We need a little help with the mortgage payments, just for a couple months until we get back on our feet." "How much?" I asked bluntly. 50,000, he said quickly, as if he was afraid he wouldn't be able to say it if he spoke any slower. 50,000, a sum that amounted to almost a third of my entire savings. Money I'd been saving for years for medical treatment and a decent old age. "That's a lot of money, Edmund," I said quietly. "I know, Papa." He put his hand on my shoulder. And I wouldn't be asking for it if it weren't absolutely necessary. We're in danger of losing the house. I looked into his eyes, trying to find some sincerity in them. Was he really desperate, or was this just another attempt to squeeze money out of his old father? I have to think about it, I said at last. It is not a sum that can be decided upon instantly. Edmund's face changed. Disappointment and irritation flashed in his eyes, but he got over it quickly. Of course, Papa, I understand. He stood up. Let's get back to this conversation tomorrow. He walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I felt cornered. On the one hand, this was my son, and if he really could lose the house, I had to help. On the other hand, he and Prue had chosen a house beyond their means, living large and never thinking about tomorrow. Why should I pay for their irresponsibility? My musings were interrupted by loud laughter. Prue stood in the center of the room, surrounded by her guests, and said something emotionally. Her movements were even more abrupt, her voice louder. She had clearly had too much wine. Did you know that my father-in-law is the richest cheapskate in Atherton? She said, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I felt the color rush to my face. Prue, Edmund said warningly, but she ignored him. Seriously, she continued with a laugh. Walter has been saving money all his life, living in an old house, driving a wreck, wearing clothes he bought in the last century. Do you know why? The guests looked at each other awkwardly, not knowing how to react. Because he thinks he's taking it all with him to the grave. Prue laughed at her own joke, but no one joined in. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to believe my ears. Is she really saying this? Publicly humiliate me on my birthday, in front of strangers? That's enough, Prue. Edmund tried to take her hand, but she waved it away. No, wait, I'm not done yet. She turned to me. Walter, we just asked for your help. Your son asked you to help keep a roof over his head. And what did you say? I'll have to think about it. What's there to think about? About not parting with money you don't need for anything? There was dead silence in the room. I rose slowly from the chair, feeling my knees shake. Not from fear, but from anger and humiliation. I think I should go, I said quietly. Yes, it's time. Prue raised her voice. The party is over for you. Get out of my house. Prue! Edmund grabbed her by the shoulders. Where'd you? You don't know what you're saying. I know what I'm saying. She shook off his hands. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of pretending that I don't hate watching him sit on his money while his own son is on the verge of ruin. I silently headed for the exit. My legs felt like absorbent cotton, and my ears were noisy. I could hear excited voices behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. The only thing I wanted to do now was to get as far away from this house, from these people, from this humiliation as possible. In the hallway, I ran into a late guest. It was Thelma, my niece. She must have found time to stop by the party after all. Dash, Uncle Walt? She looked at me in surprise. Are you leaving already? Yes, Thelma. I tried to speak calmly, but my voice trembled. I'm not welcome here anymore. What's wrong? Dash, she took my hand, looking into my eyes. I'll tell you later. Right now, I just need to leave. She nodded, not asking any more questions. I'll take you home. You don't have to, I objected. I have a car. You're upset, Uncle Walt. You shouldn't be driving right now. I'll drive you, and tomorrow we'll pick up your car. I didn't argue. We went outside, and the cool evening air made me feel a little better. It was only now that I noticed that I had tears in my eyes, not from resentment, but from impotent rage. Thelma opened the door of her old Chevy and helped me in. As she went around to get into the driver's seat, Edmund came running out of the house. Daddy, he ran to the car. Wait, don't drive away like that. I rolled down the window, looking at him tiredly. What now, son? Prue didn't mean to say all that, he said quickly, rambling. She just had too much to drink. You know how it is. I do, I said. There's truth in wine. No, it's not. He grabbed the car door. That's not what she meant. Please come back. We'll discuss this calmly. I shook my head. Not today, Edmund. I need time. But what about the money? I could see that he regretted what he had said. You see, I smiled sadly. You only care about money, not my feelings. No, Dad, that's not... We'll talk later. I nodded to Thelma, and she started the engine. We pulled away, leaving Edmund standing on the sidewalk with a confused look on his face. We drove in silence for a while. Thelma didn't ask any questions, giving me a chance to come to my senses. "Are you hungry?" she finally asked. I realized that, because of all the events, I hadn't eaten much at dinner. "A little," I admitted. "Then let's stop for a bite to eat. I can't go back to an empty house with an empty stomach on my birthday." She turned toward a small roadside cafe on the outskirts of town. The place was unassuming but cozy. We ordered coffee and sandwiches and sat in the far corner of the room. "Tell me about it." Thelma looked at me with genuine concern. I told her everything that had happened, from the awkward beginning of the evening to the climax with Prue's drunken accusations. Thelma listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking her head or frowning. "I'm sorry about what happened, Uncle Walt," she said when I was done. "Yes, it's a terrible thing. You know what the saddest part is?" I sipped my coffee. "Even if I gave them that 50,000, it wouldn't make a difference. They just don't know how to live within their means." Thelma nodded. "It's like giving a junkie another dose. Temporary relief, and then it's back to normal." We finished our sandwiches and Thelma looked at her watch. "It's getting late. Want me to drive you home?" The thought of going back to an empty house after an evening like this seemed unbearable. "You know," I said, suddenly to myself, "there's a place I'd like to stop by. It's not far from here." "Sure." Thelma finished her coffee. "Where?" "Blackmore and Associates. There should be a night watchman there." Thelma raised her eyebrows in surprise but didn't ask. We paid and went outside. The night was cool but clear. The stars shone brightly in the dark sky. "Why do you need a law firm at this hour?" Thelma asked as we got into the car. "Remember the letter I told you about? About my brother's inheritance?" I sighed. "I was there this morning and I found out some things, but I need to clarify some of the details." That wasn't entirely true. In fact, I just wanted to make sure that this morning's conversation with Mr. Blackmore hadn't been a dream or a hallucination, that my brother had really left me $10 million, and that my life was about to change completely. Thelma drove me to the law firm's office. As I'd expected, the lights were on in the building, the kind of place that always has a night watchman for emergencies. "Would you wait for me?" I asked. "It won't take long." "Sure, Uncle Walt," she smiled. "I'm in no hurry to go anywhere." I entered the building and explained to the clerk on duty what I needed. A young man, probably a paralegal, checked my paperwork and led me into a small office where copies of important papers were kept. "Mr. Blackmore left a package of documents for you," he said, pulling out a bulky folder. "He wanted me to tell you that everything is ready for you to sign. As soon as you're ready, you can make an appointment." I sat down at the table and started looking through the documents. The Oregon land titles, bank statements, investment portfolio, all confirm what Mr. Blackmore had said that morning. Hubert had indeed left me a fortune. The land my brother had bought for next to nothing 20 years ago was now in the heart of a burgeoning technology cluster. Its value had increased tenfold. In addition, Hubert was a fortunate investor. He had invested in technology stocks at the earliest stages of development. I found in the folder pictures of the house I now owned. A simple but sturdy wooden house on the edge of the forest, overlooking the mountains. A place to start a new life. Among the papers was another sealed envelope, just like the one Mr. Blackmore had given me that morning, which I had put in my dresser drawer. On this envelope was written, "Read in case of doubt." I opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of paper with a few lines written in Hubert's handwriting. "Dear brother, if you are reading this, it means you have doubts. Perhaps you are asking yourself why I left all this to you. The answer is simple, because you deserve it more than anyone else. You've always been an honest man, Walt, straightforward and firm in your convictions. We fought about this 15 years ago, and I was wrong. You were right about the land. You shouldn't have sold it. I realized that when I bought my land in Oregon. Use that money wisely. Not for those who want to spend it, but for those who value hard work and honesty. Your brother, Hubert." I sat there rereading those lines over and over again. Hubert had forgiven me. More than that, he admired the very qualities that others considered my shortcomings. My directness, my honesty, my stubbornness. All the things that annoyed Edmund and Prue were, to Hubert, virtues. I gathered the papers back into the folder and thanked the clerk on duty. Walking out of the building, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I knew what to do next. Thelma was waiting for me in the car, dozing in the driver's seat. I tapped gently on the window so as not to startle her. She perked up and smiled when she saw me. "Everything okay, Uncle Walt?" she asked, yawning. "More than okay," I answered, getting into the car. "Let's go home. I'll tell you something interesting on the way." As we pulled away from the law firm, I began to tell Thelma about Hubert's inheritance, about the $10 million, about the house in Oregon, about the letter I had just read. Her reaction was exactly what I expected: surprise, joy for me, and not a shadow of envy or self-interest. "That's amazing, Uncle Walt," she exclaimed. "What do you plan to do with that kind of money?" I wondered. After today's events, my priorities had changed. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But one thing I can say for sure is that I will no longer live my life looking up to other people's expectations. It's time for me to live for myself." Thelma nodded approvingly. "And you know what?" I added. "I think I'm going to need some help moving to Oregon. Would you like to keep me company?" She looked at me in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," I smiled. "I'll need someone I trust. Besides, there's plenty of room for two." We pulled up in front of my house. Thelma turned off the engine and turned to me. "You know, Uncle Walt," she said with a serious look, "I'd go with you even if you didn't have those millions, just because you are you." There was so much sincerity in her words that I felt a lump come up in my throat. That's what a real family is, not one that's bound by self-interest, but one that's built on mutual respect and love. "Thank you, Thelma." I squeezed her hand. "It means a lot to me." The morning after my humiliating birthday was surprisingly clear. Sunlight streamed through the curtains as if nature were mocking my gloomy mood. I woke up earlier than usual with a heavy head but a strangely light heart. For the first time in a long time, I had a purpose, a direction to go. Before breakfast, I took out of my dresser drawer the first letter Hubert had received yesterday morning from Mr. Blackmore. I had never read it yesterday, and now, after my evening visit to the law firm, I was particularly curious about it. The envelope was sealed, and on it was written in Hubert's hand, "To my brother Walter." I opened it carefully and took out several sheets of paper, written in familiar, sprawling handwriting. "Dear Walt, if you are reading this letter, it means I am gone. It is strange to write these words, knowing that you will read them when I cannot hear your answer. 15 years of silence between us is too long. I've often thought about calling you, writing to you, but pride has always stopped me. I guess it's a Thorndike family trait. Stubbornness is stronger than common sense. I've often thought of our childhood in Atherton, how we climbed trees in the old orchard, how we built a shisha in the backyard, how we protected each other from the neighborhood boys. We weren't just brothers. We were best friends. And then life took us down different paths. You chose stability, family, factory work. I sought adventure, freedom, my own way. Neither of us was wrong. We were just different. Our fight over my parents' land was stupid. I realize that now. You were right not to want to sell the land where 3 generations of Thorndikes have grown up. I was too concerned about the money it would bring. After our fight, I went to Oregon, bought a piece of land in the middle of nowhere, and started a new life. I was lucky, Walt. That piece of land I bought for next to nothing was in an area that was being developed. Silicon Valley companies are expanding, building new offices, research centers. The land on which my house stands is now worth a fortune. In addition, I've made a good investment of the money I was getting from renting out part of the land. Sometimes even the most reckless decisions turn out well. I have no wife, no children. I've been a loner all my life, and only now, on the brink of death, do I realize how much I've lost. There is no one to whom I can leave all that I have accumulated. No one but you, my brother. I know you have always lived modestly. I know you value hard work and honesty more than money and luxury. Maybe that's why I want you to have my entire fortune. Use it wisely, Walt. Not for those who would ask out of greed, but for those who truly deserve help. Forgive me for the years of silence. I'm sorry for all the unspoken words, all the missed calls. I've always loved you, brother, even when we didn't speak. You're Hubert. I sat holding the letter in my hands and felt tears come to my throat. 15 years we hadn't spoken because of a stupid fight, because of stubbornness, because of pride. 15 years of lost time that we could have spent together, supporting each other after our wives died, sharing joys and sorrows. I remembered Hubert as a young man, tall with unruly dark hair and a perpetual grin in his eyes. He had always been adventurous, always looking for adventure. As a boy, he was the one who invented the craziest games, the one who was the first to jump into the lake from the highest cliff, the one who persuaded me to participate in all his crazy schemes. And I was always cautious, calculating, preferring stability to risk. We complemented each other like two sides of the same coin. And now that he's gone, I got the last gift from him. Freedom from financial worries for the rest of my life. $10 million. A sum that seemed unreal, fantastic, a sum that was a complete game changer. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. Thelma was there, just as we'd agreed the day before. "Good morning, Uncle Walt," she smiled. "Ready to pick up your car?" "Good morning." I let her in the house. "Come on in. I was just about to have breakfast. You want to join me?" Thelma agreed, and together we made a simple breakfast of toast, scrambled eggs, and coffee. Over the meal, I told her about Hubert's letter. "It's so sad," she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. 15 years because of some quarrel, and now there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah, I agreed. Life is too short for such long grudges. I realize that only now, when it's too late to change anything. Don't say that, Thelma put her hand on mine. It's never too late to start a new life. Hubert didn't just give you money, he gave you a chance to change your life. I nodded, considering her words. She was right. This wasn't just a bank account. It was an opportunity to start over, in my own way. After breakfast, Thelma and I drove to Edmund and Prue's house to pick up my car. I had hoped to do it quickly, without too much talking, but fate had decreed otherwise. When we pulled up, I saw my Ford standing in the same spot where I'd left it yesterday. But no sooner had we gotten out of Thelma's car than the front door of the house opened and Prue stepped out onto the porch. She was pale with circles under her eyes, clearly the effects of last night's alcohol and probably a sleepless night. "Walter," she stepped forward. "I'm so glad you came. I need to talk to you." I looked at her with cold politeness. "Prue, I just came to get my car. I don't have anything to say to you after yesterday. Please," she sounded desperate, "just 5 minutes. I have to apologize." Thelma gave me a questioning look, and I nodded. "Okay, 5 minutes," I said, following Prue into the house. There were still signs of last night's party in the living room. Empty glasses, uneaten appetizers, furniture that had been moved. Edmund was nowhere to be seen. "Where is my son?" I asked. "He left for work," Prue replied, nervously tugging at the sleeve of her silk robe. "He had an important meeting. He couldn't cancel." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Prue took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "Walter, I want to apologize for last night," she began. "I had too much to drink, and the alcohol played tricks on me. I said some terrible things that I didn't really mean." I stared at her, trying to find a shred of sincerity in her words. But all I saw was fear and calculation. "I've always respected you," she continued. "Your work, your devotion to your family, your frugality, those are qualities to be admired." "Prue," I interrupted her, "let's cut to the chase. You kicked me out of your house on my birthday, publicly humiliating me in front of strangers. What changed overnight?" she faltered, avoiding my gaze. "I realized my mistake," she said quietly. Edmund was so upset. He loves you, Walter. We both do." At that moment, my phone rang. The number was unidentifiable, but I decided to answer it, any excuse to interrupt this insincere conversation. Dash dash. "Hello, dash Mr. Thorndyke." There was an unfamiliar female voice. "This is Carol from the law firm of Blackmore and Associates. Mr. Blackmore wanted me to tell you that your inheritance papers are ready to be signed. You can come in today or tomorrow at your convenience." "Thank you, Carol," I replied. "I'll be in this afternoon." "Great. Also, Mr. Blackmore asked me to remind you that we're talking about $10 million, so you'll need some time to familiarize yourself with all the details." "Of course, I understand. I'll see you later." I ended the call and put the phone in my pocket. It was only then that I noticed the change in Prue's face. She froze, eyes wide open as if she'd seen a ghost. $10 million, Dash, she whispered. Walter, what does that mean? I mentally cursed. Carol at the law firm had done me a disservice by saying the amount out loud, but there was no point in denying the obvious. My brother Hubert left me an inheritance, I said calmly. It's a private matter that doesn't concern you or Edmund. Prue took a step toward me, her face transformed. Gone were the traces of fatigue and false remorse. There was an eager gleam in her eyes. Doesn't it concern you? She laughed nervously. Walter, we're your family. Of course it concerns us. After last night, I'm not sure I have a family, I replied coldly. She suddenly fell to her knees right in front of me, grabbing my hands. Forgive me, please. Her voice shook, tears rolling down her cheeks. I had been horribly, unforgivably rude. Alcohol, stress, financial problems. None of that is an excuse, I know. But I swear I will never say another word against you. You are the best father-in-law a woman could dream of. Her transformation was so quick and unnatural that I felt slightly nauseous. It wasn't remorse, it was a play for money. Stand up, Prue, I said, releasing my hands. You're not humiliating me, you're humiliating yourself. No, I'm not getting up until you forgive me. She clung to my lap. Please, Walter, we're a family. We have to stick together. I gently backed away, forcing her to finally rise from her knees. I have to go, I said, heading for the exit. I'll get my car and leave. When I'm ready to talk, I'll contact you myself. Walter, she shouted after me, you can't just walk away. We have to discuss this. Edmund is your son. Your only son. I didn't turn around. Getting into my Ford, I nodded to Thelma, who was waiting in her car, and we both drove away from Edmund and Prue's house. In the rearview mirror, I saw Prue standing on the porch with her hand to her mouth. Maybe she really was regretting her words and actions, or more likely, regretted that her behavior might have cost her a share of my unexpected wealth. Thelma and I met at a small cafe not far from my house. She listened patiently to my story about my meeting with Prue and the call from the law firm. Now she knows about the money, Thelma sighed, and she's probably already calling Edmund. Let them know, I shrugged. It would have gotten out sooner or later anyway. What are you going to do next? Thelma asked, looking at me carefully. First, I'm going to go to Mr. Blackmore and sign all the necessary documents, I answered. And then I'll decide what to do with Edmund and Prue. Be careful, Uncle Walt, Thelma warned me. Money changes people, and not always for the better. I've already seen it change Prue in 5 minutes, I grinned wickedly, from contempt to servility in one phone call. After the coffee shop, Thelma left for work, and I went home to get ready for my visit to the law firm. I showered, changed, and was out of the house when I noticed a familiar car pulling up in front of my house. It was Edmund. He jumped out of the car and hurried over to me, adjusting his tie as he went. His face was a mixture of excitement, hope, and ill-concealed greed. Dash Daddy. He held out his arms for a hug, but I took a step back. I just talked to Prue. Is it true? Uncle Hubert left you $10 million? Hello, Edmund, I replied calmly. Yes, it's true. I'm just about to go to the lawyer to sign the papers. That's amazing, he laughed nervously. Who would have thought old Hubert would be so rich in the middle of nowhere? I looked at my son and saw the feverish calculation behind his words. How much could he get out of that money? How fast? What would he spend it on? Prue said she tried to apologize, he continued. I want to apologize for last night, too. It was a horrible night, and I'm ashamed of the way things turned out. It was my birthday, Edmund, I reminded him. A day that should have been special, but turned out to be a humiliation. I know, Dad, and I'm so sorry. He looked genuinely upset, but I didn't believe he was sincere. But things can be different now. With this money, you can live any way you want. We can all live differently. We? I raised an eyebrow. Well, yeah, he faltered. I mean, you'd help your only son, right? Especially now that you have so much money? That was it. The question he'd come to ask. Not, how are you feeling after yesterday? Or, what can I do to help? But how much will I get? I have to go, Edmund, I said, stepping around him and heading for my car. Dash, Mr. Blackmore is waiting for me. But Dad, he grabbed my arm. We have to talk about this. It concerns the whole family. We will, I said, releasing his hand. But not tonight. I need time to think about it. I got in my car and drove away, leaving Edmund standing outside my house with a confused look on his face. In the rearview mirror, I saw him pull out his phone and start calling someone, probably Prue, to let me know that he hadn't made any progress yet. The Blackmore and Associates office was waiting for me. I spent the next 2 hours signing documents, discussing the details of the inheritance, and listening to advice on asset management. Mr. Blackmore was professional and sensitive, never once mentioning the phone call incident. He only advised me to be careful with information about my new status. When people find out about an inheritance like this, there will inevitably be those around who will want their share, he said as we were finishing up. Be selective in who you trust. I nodded, thinking of Prue kneeling in the living room and Edmund rushing over to me with a fake apology. They had already lined up for their share of the inheritance without even giving me time to realize what had happened. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Joy from the unexpected wealth, sadness from the loss of my brother, with whom I never managed to reconcile, and bitterness from the realization that my closest people turned out to be the most self-serving. I spent the next few days in a strange state of detachment. Despite the signed documents and the official inheritance, I still couldn't fully comprehend what had happened. $10 million. It was a sum that just didn't make sense. Mr. Blackmore recommended that I consult with a financial advisor, and I agreed to meet with him. A young man named Christopher Payne arrived at my house with a stack of brochures and charts. He spoke quickly, confidently, constantly using terms I barely understood. Diversification, the stock market, investment portfolios, tax shelters. Mr. Thorndyke, he said, laying out the glossy booklets in front of me. With this amount of money, you can provide yourself not just a comfortable old age, but a real luxurious life. And there will be enough left over for several generations of your family. A few generations? I grinned. I have only one son and no grandchildren. Christopher looked embarrassed but recovered quickly. I meant potentially. The main thing is to manage the capital properly now. I recommend dividing the sum into several parts. Some of it should be invested in safe, but not very profitable instruments, and some in riskier, but potentially more profitable ones. In addition, you should think about charity. It is not only helping the needy, but also tax benefits. I listened to him half-heartedly. My thoughts were far away, in Oregon, at Hubert's house, where I hadn't yet been but which I already envisioned as my new home. A quiet place away from Atherton, from Edmund and Prue, from this whole situation that was becoming increasingly tense. Mr. Thorndyke? Christopher interrupted my musings. Are you listening? Yes, of course. I shook myself. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. Too much information in one day. I understand, he nodded with a professional smile. Maybe we should continue this another time. You need time to think things over. I agreed, and we arranged to meet again in a few days. When he left, I was relieved. I really needed to be alone, to gather my thoughts. Thelma stopped by in the evening, bringing a homemade pie and a thermos of tea. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun go down. How are you? She asked, handing me a cup of the flavorful drink. It's weird, I admitted. It's like none of this is happening to me. You know, I've spent my whole life counting every dollar, and now I have so much money that I don't even know what to do with it. Thelma smiled. You'll figure it out. You've always been a sensible man. Edmund called 3 times today, I said, changing the subject. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready for this conversation. I understand, Thelma nodded. He probably wants to discuss his share of the inheritance. I'm sure he does, I sipped my tea. You know what the saddest part is? If he'd just come and honestly said, Dad, I'm in trouble, help me, I would have. No strings attached, no strings attached. But instead there were fake apologies, hypocritical smiles, and obvious calculation. It's often not the money itself that ruins people, but the desire to get it, Thelma said thoughtfully. We were silent, watching the last rays of the sun coloring the sky orange and pink. The evening was quiet, calm, unlike the storm that was raging in my soul. Have you decided what you're going to do with the inheritance? Thelma asked after a long pause. Not yet, I shook my head. But I'm leaning more and more toward moving to Hubert's house in Oregon. Start a new life, away from all this. What about Edmund? I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to just forget about everything and go away. Another part, the other part reminds me that he's my only son, my flesh and blood, no matter what. Thelma nodded understandingly. She never tried to force her opinion on me, and I appreciated that quality. Unlike the others, she didn't want my money. She just wanted me to be happy. The next morning, as I was eating breakfast, the doorbell rang. Edmund stood on the doorstep, wearing a suit and carrying a bouquet of flowers. There was a look of nervousness in his eyes. Dad. He handed me the bouquet. I tried to call you, but you didn't answer. I've been busy, I replied, accepting the flowers. Come in. Edmund walked into the house, looking around with slight surprise, as if he were seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was already imagining what he would do with the house after I died. Coffee? I offered, heading for the kitchen. Yes, thank you. He followed me. We were sitting at the kitchen table, tension hanging between us. Edmund was fiddling with his cup, hesitant to start a conversation. Well, I said at last, what did you want to talk about? He took a deep breath. Dad, I want to apologize. I want to apologize, really apologize, without any second thoughts. What happened at your birthday party was unforgivable. Prue was drunk, but that's no excuse. And I should have stopped her, protected you. I screwed up, and I'm sorry. I looked at my son carefully, trying to see how sincere his words were. I saw remorse in his eyes, but also impatience. He clearly wanted to get to the main topic of his visit. I appreciate your apology, Edmund, I said. But words are just words. Deeds speak louder. I know, he nodded. And I'm ready to prove that I am truly sorry. Prue and I talked it over and decided to take your advice. We put the house on the market. That statement took me by surprise. I didn't expect them to actually take my advice. Did they? Yes. Edmund looked proud of himself. You were right. We've been living beyond our means, and it's led us to financial ruin. It's time to start living responsibly. I couldn't help but admire his acting skills. He played the part of the repentant son so convincingly that I almost believed him. Almost. So what's next, I asked. What are your plans? We're looking for a smaller apartment in a more affordable neighborhood. We're going to sell one of the cars. Prue is looking for an extra job. We'll manage, he paused. But of course, it's going to take us a while to get back on our feet. And if you could, there it was. I waited for the conversation to turn to money, and I wasn't wrong. If I could what? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Help us through this transition, Edmund said carefully, choosing his words. Not just give us money, but maybe invest in us. I've been thinking about my own business for a long time. With your support, I could... How much? I interrupted him. He hesitated. What? How much do you want, Edmund? Don't be so blunt. How much? He lowered his eyes. 500,000, he said quietly. Enough to pay off the debts and start the business? 500,000. 10 times what he'd asked for before he found out about the inheritance. I shook my head, not so much in rejection as in surprise at his insolence. I'll think about it, I said, getting up from the table. I need some time. Of course, Papa. Edmund stood up as well. I understand. It's a lot of money and you have to think it over. But remember, I'm your son, your only son. Who else would you leave all this wealth to? That's the main argument. Blood ties, family duty, the inevitability of inheritance. Edmund was sure he'd get it all sooner or later. I'll contact you when I've made up my mind, I said as I walked him to the door. He hugged me goodbye, but it was awkward, formal. When the door closed behind him, I leaned my back against it and took a deep breath. This was only the beginning. Edmund wouldn't back down that easily. A call from Mr. Blackmore interrupted my musings. Mr. Thorndyke, he began after a greeting. I have some news that may interest you. I received a call from a man who introduced himself as your nephew. He was interested in the details of the inheritance and asked if there was any mention of him in the will. I don't have a nephew, I answered, feeling anger boiling up inside me. Was it my son, Edmund? No, he called himself Lyle Thorndyke, said he was your brother's son. I froze. Hubert's son? As far as I knew, my brother had no children. There must be some mistake, I said, or a fraud. Hubert had no family. That's what I thought, Mr. Blackmore replied. There's no mention of any other heirs in the papers. But I thought I'd warn you. Such relatives often appear when it comes to large inheritances. We agreed to meet the next day to discuss the incident further. After the conversation, I remained seated in my chair, pondering what was going on. Had the news of the inheritance spread so widely that even the crooks had gotten to me? Or was this some kind of trick by Edmund? Thelma called in the evening, and I told her about Edmund's visit and Mr. Blackmore's call. A fake nephew? She whistled. Wow. Rumors of your wealth spread faster than wildfire. I guess so, I sighed. And this is just the beginning. What's next? Distant relatives I didn't even know existed? Former co-workers asking for help? You need to be more careful, Uncle Walt. Thelma's voice was troubled. Maybe you should leave town for a while, at least for a week, to think things over in peace. I found the thought tempting. Getting away from Atherton, from all these people who suddenly remembered I existed just because I got rich. You know, that's not such a bad idea, I said. Maybe I should go to Oregon and see Hubert's house. I could go with you, Thelma suggested. It wouldn't be hard to take a week's vacation. We agreed to discuss the details of the trip later, and I hung up the phone, feeling somewhat relieved. The prospect of leaving Atherton, if only temporarily, seemed more and more appealing. The following morning I went to meet with Mr. Blackmore. He showed me a recording of a conversation with his supposed nephew and some documents he had emailed to me, a birth certificate, some photographs supposedly proving his relationship to Hubert. They're all forgeries and pretty crude ones at that, Mr. Blackmore concluded. We've already contacted the police. It's clearly an attempt at fraud. I nodded, looking at a photograph that showed a man I didn't recognize standing next to a man who looked remotely like Hubert. The photo was old, grainy, obviously processed in a computer program. What am I supposed to do? I asked. Nothing yet. Mr. Blackmore gathered the documents back into the folder. We'll get through this, but I advise you to be careful. Don't divulge any information about the inheritance. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Don't open the door to strangers. I thanked him for his advice and was about to leave when he stopped me. Mr. Thorndyke, one more thing. You mentioned that you would like to visit your brother's home in Oregon. I can arrange a trip. We have a partner law firm in Portland. They can make all the arrangements. I agreed, and we discussed the details. It was decided that I would go to Oregon in a week, along with Thelma. Mr. Blackmore promised to arrange a meeting with a local lawyer who would hand me the keys to the house and give me a tour of the property. Walking out of the office, I felt better. Concrete plans, action, was something that always helped me deal with anxiety. I decided to stop by the bank to discuss opening a new account for part of the inheritance. Mr. Blackmore recommended splitting the money into several accounts at different banks for safety. At the bank, I was greeted with unusual courtesy. Apparently, news of my unexpected wealth had reached them. The manager personally escorted me to a separate office, offered me coffee and cakes, and spoke at length about the advantages of their VIP service. I listened half-heartedly, thinking about how quickly people's attitudes change when they find out you have money. A month ago, I was just one of many customers, but now I was greeted as a very important person. Finished with my banking business, I decided to walk around town to clear my head. Atherton was a small town where everyone knew each other. I'd lived here all my life, knew every street, every alley. But now, walking through familiar places, I felt like a stranger. People looked at me differently, some with curiosity, some with envy, some with ill-concealed hope. The news of my inheritance had apparently traveled all over town. In the little cafe where I sometimes drank coffee, the owner, usually reserved and taciturn, suddenly became overly obliging. He offered me the best table, brought me a free dessert, and talked at length about his plans to expand his business. I understood what he was getting at, and it only made me tired. Money changed not only my life, but also the attitude of everyone around me, and not always for the better. When I returned home, I found a fruit basket and a bottle of expensive wine on my doorstep. Attached to it was a card from Prue. Thank you for your wise counsel. You have always been an example to us. Love, Prue. I set the basket on the kitchen table and stared at the card for a long time. Just a couple weeks ago, this woman had kicked me out of her house on my birthday, calling me a cheapskate and an old-fashioned fool. And now she was writing about love and gratitude. It's all about money. Only because of money. I sat down in the chair by the window, the same one Eleanor liked to sit in, and thought, what would she say now? What would she do in my place? Eleanor had always been kinder than me, gentler, more forgiving. But even she would not have tolerated such hypocrisy. My thoughts turned to Hubert. My brother, whom we hadn't spoken to in 15 years, had left me his entire fortune. Not to some distant relative, not to some charitable organization, but to me. Why? His letter said he respected my principles, my integrity. He valued those qualities even if they were the cause of our quarrel. And now I had to decide what to do with his inheritance. What would Hubert do in my place? He wouldn't throw money around, that's for sure. My brother was always prudent, even in his wildest ventures. He would invest wisely, help those who truly deserved help, not those who were just holding out their hand. I pulled out a picture of Hubert and me as kids. Two boys with identical smiles and unruly curls. We were inseparable then, overcoming all difficulties together, rejoicing in victories together. How is it that we have spent the last 15 years in silence? Pride, stubbornness, unwillingness to take the first step toward reconciliation. Now that it was too late, I regretted it most of all. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. A middle-aged man in a nice suit, briefcase in hand, stood on the doorstep. Dash, Mr. Thorndyke? He handed me a business card. My name is Harry Finch, and I represent the Midas Group Investment Company. We specialize in high net worth management. I have an offer that might interest you. I glanced at the business card, then at Mr. Finch's very directed face. Another hunter after my money. Thank you, but I'm not interested, I said, handing the business card back. But you didn't even listen to my offer. He was indignant. We could double your fortune in 5 years. Goodbye, Mr. Finch. I closed the door without waiting for a reply. It was the fourth financial advisor in a week. They appeared like mushrooms after the rain, all with unique offers and promises of fabulous profits. I was beginning to understand why Hubert had chosen to live as a hermit in the Oregon wilderness. Money attracts people, but not always people you'd want to be around. That evening, sitting in the quiet of my home, I made a decision. It was time to act before the situation got out of hand. I dialed Mr. Blackmore's number. Dash, Mr. Thorndyke, he answered after the first beep. What can I do for you? I've made a decision, I said, and I need your help to organize everything. We talked for about an hour going over the details. When the conversation ended, I was relieved. The plan was ready. All that was left was to put it into action. I called Thelma and told her about my decision. She listened in silence and then said, Are you sure, Uncle Walt? It's a big step. I've never been more sure, I replied. And it was time for a change. We agreed that she would pick me up tomorrow morning and we would go together to Mr. Blackmore's office to sign the necessary papers. And then we would begin preparations for our trip to Oregon. Before going to bed, I reread Hubert's letter one more time. Use this money wisely, Walt. Not for those who will ask out of greed, but for those who truly deserve help. I smiled. Hubert had always been wiser than me, even if I didn't always admit it. And now, after his death, I finally understood what he meant. Money isn't just pieces of paper or numbers in an account. It's an opportunity to make a difference, to make the right choices, to leave behind something worthwhile. And I knew my choice was the right one. Hubert would understand and approve. The day I scheduled the family meeting was sunny and warm, despite the late fall. I woke up early, feeling strangely calm. The decision was made, the papers were signed, and all that was left was to inform the family. Thelma arrived first to help with the preparations. We set the table in the living room, prepared light appetizers and drinks. It wasn't a holiday dinner, but it wasn't a business meeting either. Something in between. Nervous? Thelma asked, setting the cups down. Surprisingly not, I answered. I hadn't felt this confident in a long time. She smiled and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Uncle Walt. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Edmund and Prue arrived exactly at the appointed time. A rare occasion, they were usually late. It showed how important they considered this meeting to be. I opened the door and saw them, dressed up with strained smiles. Prue was holding a box of cake, Edmund a bottle of wine. "Dad!" Edmund hugged me with exaggerated warmth. "How nice of you to invite us." "Come in." I stepped back, letting them into the house. They entered the living room and froze when they saw Thelma. I noticed the change in Prue's face. The slight grimace of displeasure was quickly replaced by a polite smile. "Thelma, what a surprise," she said, setting the cake on the table. "I didn't know you were coming too." "Walter invited me," Thelma replied simply, not giving in to provocation. The atmosphere immediately became tense. Edmund and Prue exchanged quick glances, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of a third person at what they considered a private family meeting. "Have a seat," I pointed to the couch. "Tea? Coffee? Maybe wine would be better," Edmund suggested, picking up the bottle. "I brought your favorite." "No, thank you." I shook my head. "I prefer to keep a clear head." We sat down, me in my chair, Thelma next to me in a chair, Edmund and Prue on the couch opposite. We talked about nothing for a while. Weather, news of the town, health. I could see Edmund's nervousness, Prue's strained smile. They were waiting for me to get to the main topic for which I'd invited them. Finally, I set down my cup and straightened in my chair. "I've invited you here to inform you of the decision I've made about Hubert's inheritance." Edmund and Prue stepped forward, their faces expressing impatient anticipation. Thelma sat quietly, already knowing all the details. "I've done a lot of thinking in the last few weeks, a lot of consulting with lawyers and financial advisors," I continued. "It's a big responsibility to manage a fortune like this." "Of course, Dad," Edmund nodded gravely. "It's a very important decision. We will support any choice you make." Prue nodded silently, pressing her lips together in a strained smile. "I've decided to sell this house," I said, watching their reactions. For a moment, hope flashed in their eyes. They probably thought I was going to move in with them. "I'm moving to Hubert's house in Oregon," I added. Thelma had agreed to come with me. Prue's smile froze and Edmund's eyes widened. "Oregon?" he interjected. "Hatsur, but that's so far away." 6 hours by airplane," I shrugged. "Distance isn't a problem these days." "But why?" Prue sounded puzzled. "Why leave Atherton, your family, everything you care about?" "I want to start a new life," I answered simply. "Hubert's house is in a beautiful place, on the edge of the forest, overlooking the mountains. Quiet, clean air, no city bustle." "Sounds like a hermitage," Edmund remarked with a nervous chuckle. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "I've lived my whole life in noise, surrounded by people. Now I want peace and quiet." Prue glanced at Thelma, a look of ill-concealed distaste in her eyes. "What? And Thelma would just give up her job, her life here to come with you?" "I don't have anything here I can't leave behind," Thelma replied calmly. "You can get a job driving a school bus in Oregon." There was an awkward pause. Edmund and Prue were clearly trying to make sense of the new information and see how it affected their plans for the inheritance. "What about the rest of the inheritance?" Edmund asked cautiously. "The money?" Here we come to the main question they were interested in. "I plan to invest most of it," I said. "I've always wanted to start my own business, but never had enough money. Now I do." "A business?" Edmund looked puzzled. "What business, Dad?" "You're 68. An old furniture restoration shop," I answered. "I've always loved working with wood, you know. It'll be a small business, not for profit, but for the soul." "But that's millions of dollars," exclaimed Prue, unable to stand it. "You can't just invest it in some workshop." "I can," I looked at her calmly. "It's my money, Prue. I can dispose of it however I want." "But we're your family," she raised her voice. "Aren't you supposed to take care of us?" "I do," I replied. "That's why I've decided to set aside a certain amount of money to pay off your mortgage debt." Their faces brightened. "In provided," I added, "that you sell the house and buy a home within your means, as promised." Prue opened her mouth to object, but Edmund squeezed her hand, silencing her. "That's very generous of you, Papa." he said gently. What about, well, my business idea? Remember I told you? I do. I nodded. And I'm willing to provide the seed money. $50,000. Not 500, like you asked, but 50. That's enough to get us started. Edmund turned pale, but quickly pulled himself together. Thank you, Papa. It means a great deal to me. But there is a condition, I continued. The money will be dispersed in installments as your business grows, and only for specific agreed-upon expenses. You don't trust me? There was resentment in his voice. It's not a matter of trust, but of responsibility, I replied. I want you to learn how to manage money before you get a large sum of money. Prue couldn't take it anymore. It's not fair, she exclaimed. You're treating us like children, and you're going off to the middle of nowhere with that. She threw a scornful glance at Thelma. That woman who isn't even related to you. Thelma is my late wife's family, I replied coldly, and she's the only person who has always treated me with genuine respect, not fake courtesy for the sake of money. Prue gasped with indignation. Edmund put a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Prue, please, he whispered. Don't make it worse. No, I will not be silent. She pushed his hand away. Your father is going to disinherit us from an inheritance that should rightfully be ours, and you sit there and nod like a dummy. It was never your inheritance. I remained calm despite her outburst. Hubert left it all to me, with clear instructions. What instructions? Prue snorted. I stood up, walked over to the dresser and pulled out Hubert's letter, the same one I'd gotten at the law firm the day I was born. Here, I returned to my chair. I'm going to read part of it to you. I unfolded the pieces of paper and began to read. I know that you have always lived modestly. I know that you value hard work and honesty more than money and luxury. Maybe that's why I want my entire fortune to go to you. Use it wisely, Walt, not for those who would ask out of greed, but for those who truly deserve help. I looked at Edmund and Prue. They sat silent, shocked by the directness of Hubert's words. That's why I made this decision, I said, folding the letter. I respect my brother's will, and I think he was right. It's just a letter, Edmund said at last. It has no legal effect. You can still dispose of the money however you want. I can, I agreed, and I decided to do exactly what I wanted to do. Move to Oregon, open a shop, start a new life, and help you just enough to get you back on your feet, but that's it. Prue jumped up from the couch, her face contorted with rage. You're going to regret this, she hissed. We are your family, your blood, and you chose some strange woman and a stupid workshop over us. Prue, Edmund tried to take her hand, but she pushed him away. No, Edmund, I will not be silent. He has no right to do this to us. We can contest the will. We can sue. On what grounds, I asked calmly. The will is legally flawless. Hubert was of sound mind and good judgment. You have no grounds for a lawsuit. We'll find one. Prue grabbed his purse. Let's go, Edmund. There's nothing more for us to do here. Edmund hesitated, looking at me and his wife. Papa, he began uncertainly, perhaps we could talk some more about… Edmund! Prue was already at the door, her voice ringing with indignation. He sighed, got up from the couch, and walked over to me. Yeah, I hope you don't regret your decision, he said quietly. I won't, I answered, looking into his eyes. For the first time in a long time, I was absolutely sure of what I was doing. He nodded, lowering his gaze, and walked toward the door. Prue was already out on the porch, slamming the door defiantly. Goodbye, son, I said after him. He turned around on the threshold, his face a mixture of resentment, disappointment, and vague hope. Goodbye, Dad, he said, and closed the door behind him. Thelma and I were alone in the quiet living room. Outside the window, the sun was still shining, the birds were still singing, and the last of the fall leaves were rustling in the wind. The world hadn't changed, but something inside me had definitely changed. Are you okay? Thelma asked, coming toward me. Yes, I nodded. Surprisingly, yes, I thought it would be harder. You did the right thing. She put her hand gently on my shoulder. They never really appreciated you. I know, I sighed. But it's still sad. Edmund is my only son. I hoped money wouldn't change him so much. Money doesn't change people, Thelma said thoughtfully. It just shows them who they are. We sat in silence, staring out the window at the quiet streets of Atherton, the city I'd lived in all my life and would soon leave, perhaps forever. A year later, I was sitting on the veranda of Hubert's house, watching the sunset over the Oregon mountains. The air was fragrant with the scent of pine trees and evening coolness. Nearby, Thelma sat in a rocking chair, leafing through a book. It had been a year since we'd moved here, and I'd never regretted my decision. Hubert's house was exactly as I'd imagined, spacious, cozy, with large windows and a view of the woods and mountains. The 20-acre lot offered enough privacy to feel out of the world, but not completely isolated. I opened a workshop to restore old furniture as I had planned, a small business that brought not so much income as pleasure. Working with wood had always soothed me, but now it had become a real passion. The locals appreciated my talent, and soon I had regular customers. Thelma found a job as a school bus driver in the nearest town, and in her spare time she helped me in the workshop. We lived a quiet, measured life, enjoying every day, every sunset, every moment of peace and quiet. From Atherton came rare news. Edmund called several times, first with accusations and threats, then with requests for more money. I remained firm in my decision. Help only on agreed terms, no more. They did sell the house and bought a smaller apartment. Edmund started a business, a small consulting firm. I gave money in installments, as promised, keeping track of every expense. It made him angry, but it made him more responsible. Prue hasn't spoken to me since the day they left my house. According to Edmund, she still felt that I had acted unfairly in depriving them of their rightful inheritance. This did not surprise or particularly bother me. I often thought of Hubert as I sat on the veranda of his, now my, house. Sometimes I thought I felt his presence, his approval. It was as if he were saying, "You did the right thing, brother." And I truly believed I had done the right thing. Money wouldn't have brought happiness to Edmund or Prue. It would have only reinforced their worst qualities. But for me, it gave me freedom, a chance to start over, to live the life I'd always wanted. "What are you thinking about?" Thelma asked, taking a break from the book. "About life," I answered with a smile. "About how things have changed this year." "For the better?" "Definitely for the better," I nodded, looking at the sunset. "You know, I never thought it was possible to start a new life at my age, but it turns out it's never too late." Thelma smiled and went back to reading. I continued to stare at the mountains, colored gold and purple by the setting sun. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried out. The wind rustled quietly in the pines. I thought about my life, the choices I had made, the roads that had brought me here, about Eleanor, who I'm sure would approve of my decision, about Hubert, whose last gift changed everything, about the toxic relationship from which I was finally free. For the first time in years, I felt truly happy. It wasn't wealth that brought this happiness, but freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from other people's expectations, from having to conform to someone else's idea of how I should be. I realized that real value is not in money, but in the ability to recognize sincerity in people, in the courage to walk away from toxic relationships, in the ability to appreciate what is truly important. The sun had finally disappeared over the horizon, giving way to the stars. I got up from my chair, stretched, and looked up at the sky, which was studded with bright dots. "Let's go inside," I said to Thelma. "It's getting chilly." We entered the warm, cozy house, leaving behind the threshold of the past life, resentments, disappointments. Here in the mountains of Oregon, in my brother's house, my new chapter began. A chapter in which I was not just a father, not just a father-in-law, not just the owner of unexpected wealth. I was myself, Walter Thorndike, a man who had finally found freedom and peace, and that was the best inheritance I could have gotten.